It being 2:02 p.m., what I would like to do so I am chairing this capstone defense as my role. I get to play Master of Ceremonies as well, just to remind you and to talk about the process as well. So Serge you will have the ability to share your screen. You'll have 25 minutes. I will time your 25 minutes. At the end of your 25 minutes, we'll have 25 minutes of question and response. It will be led by your supervisor, Professor Michael Meath. And then you have two co-readers, second readers, Dr. Alex Sevigny and Professor Brad Horn. So they will do a round robin. I will reserve the right to ask a question as well as the chair of the defense. And then if time permits, we'll have another second round. And then if time permits there, we'll open it up to our MCM community and to your family as well, because it is a public defense. So are you ready to go? Oh, so just at the end of it, once we're finished the question and answer, Alex, Brad, and Michael and I will mute ourselves, and we will then have a conversation amongst ourselves to go over your capstone, your presentation, and your final mark. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So are you giving me the controls now?
You have the ability to share I have given you the opportunity to share your screen.
Okay, excellent.
And when we're ready, we will start the 25 minutes.
All right, well, I'm just gonna get this up and going. Okay.
Good to go. You're on the clock.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining me here today. I'm sure a majority of you or all of you already know that we will be speaking about ethics in crisis management. Just going over the agenda really quickly. We will quickly go through what I put together as a background. We'll then go through the research problem and questions, literature review. I had 3 sections in my capstone. And that had the discursive review in it. Then we'll go over the research methodology, results, and discussion, and then from there, conclusion as well. So let's get started. Immediately, like yesterday, urgently, that's the #1 prescribed treatment for an organizational crisis. I remember when I was working in a cabinet minister's office, and the PMO lead for issues always said, speed kills. But under this pressure and many others, as we will discuss later on today, do public relation practitioners use an ethical framework to help make ethical decisions for the organization or with the organization? How do they determine what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad? No one is invincible to crisis. That is a unanimous vote across crisis management authors. The pandemic is a very good proof of that. But the difference is with the pandemic, and I hope this is the case going forward, that's a rare thing to actually have taken place. In fact, the most common cause to a crisis is human missteps. And so we're going to be talking about how ethical frameworks could potentially help organizations sidestep some of these missteps. And it's really important to do so because it has been pointed out by many crisis management authors and public relation officers as well, or authors as well, that state that we are actually in a position to be the ethical pulse of the organization. And here's the reason why these ethical decisions are so important, or why the frameworks can really help organizations stay out of trouble. Just 3 examples really quickly to show that the private sector, the public sector, and the not-for-profit sector are all vulnerable to crisis. So we had Theranos, who was valued at $9 billion. All of a sudden, all that just evaporated because the CEO was found to be fraudulent. You had the very famous case of the Boeing 737 MAX that ended in a tragedy, all because they put safety below their bottom line. And then thirdly, We also saw the political fallout and also the not-for-profit fallout with the We Charity. All of these have one thing in common, and that was that there was either the perception of an unethical decision or unethical decisions were made. Okay, so what are we going to look at here today? There is a bad reputation for public relations in terms of not being very ethical or actually being attached to any theory whatsoever that would help them be ethical in their practice. So I've done a discursive review to ensure that, in fact, there is theory that does position the public relations practitioner to be the ethical conscience of the organization. Secondly, it is important then to find out what is the retained knowledge of public relation practitioners who have in fact received some level of ethical training. Secondly, thirdly, we will be examining as well how aware their public relations practitioners are of a crisis management plan that is in place, and how many of those plans actually have instructions to consult an ethical decision-making platform. Okay, really quickly, I don't want to hang on this for too long, but a couple of terms are necessary just to get out there really quickly. So we've got morality. This is a system of rules. It defines the actions as moral or immoral. And ethics is really the study of morals. And this really does help us actually develop a discipline to think rationally. This is how we determine for ourselves what is moral and what is not moral. And then thirdly as well, I did look into the education of ethics as it pertains to the public relations industry. And it has been found that there is very, well, they're not great reviews, unfortunately. Bivens found that there are brief discussions in PR textbooks. That was back in the 80s. And it's also been lamented that the discussions, even in classrooms, are too brief to actually have the students come away with a true grasp of what ethical theory can actually do for them. What frameworks will we be discussing today? It was in my my literature review. It was pointed out by Ian Metroff that there are three main ones out there: deontology, teleology, which is utilitarianism as well, and virtues. We will only be talking about the first two here today. They're very deep topics, most definitely. And these slides, one slide for each, certainly doesn't do them justice for how complicated they are, but needs to be as succinct as possible. So in Kant's deontology, the morality is all contained in the intent of the action, and it's all based on goodwill. Essentially, what he was always saying was, you need to remove yourself from all of your pleasures, your desires, your passions, your needs, which he called his counsels of prudence. Once you divorce yourself from that, now all you have left is your will to act. And now if you are going to act in a way that is moral, then that means that you actually have goodwill in the intent of the action. And so he actually made morality almost guaranteed in his framework. So long as you act a particular way that is respectful of universal moral law, then you are always going to be moral. And there is no means to an end. So you're never morally wanting with deontology. It does have to take a framework, a form of the categorical imperative. And that is formed of three different principles. These principles are basically the exact same, just mentioned a little bit differently. And the one that is most popular is the law of universality. And this is where it's basically following along the same lines as the biblical golden rule that says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Moving on to teleology, we're talking about the very opposite of deontology. Deontology doesn't worry about consequences whatsoever, where teleology and utilitarianism is only concerned with the consequences and only concerned with the material consequences of an action. And it's all based on something that Bentham and that Mill had explained as utility. And utility is a value that is actually in the consequence that measures the pleasure, happiness, or the pain or the unhappiness of the consequence. And they figured that the only thing that was good in life is to be happy. So a decision needed to render a certain level of happiness. They built together a calculation, I should say Bentham puts together a calculation, and he used 6 different frameworks to measure the level of pleasure. That would be intensity, duration, certainty, uncertainty, propinquity, remoteness, fecundity, and purity. And if anybody has any questions about any of these variables later on, I'd be most happy to go through all of these frameworks, but we have a lot of information to go through, so I want to keep on going to be respectful of time. Okay, what's the negative perception of public relations? Well, it has a lot to do with being, spin doctors, and also a flack, or perhaps we're too fluffy because all we're doing is writing press releases or news releases or speeches. Perhaps we're just full of smoke and mirrors as well. This perception, it has been posited by the Grunig and White, that the reason that this is the case is because there's not a lot of adhesiveness to the theories. There's no consistency in theoretical use. And that actually renders us to a certain extent, or the industry, ethically basis in the eyes of onlookers. There are others who actually say that we're the type who are called when the truth just won't do, or when we're trying to sell the Titanic as the love boat. So it was incumbent on me at that point in time to figure out, is there a normative public relations theory out there that will position the public relations officer to be the ethical pulse of the organization? Because at this point in time, the perception that is out there about public relations, it doesn't seem likely that people would believe that at this point in time. And I'm not sure if too many the public relation practitioners, even the ones that I ended up surveying, are aware of this framework. The answer is strategic public relations management. This is the top-notch theory of public relations, and it does definitely place the public relations officer in the position to be the ethical pulse of the organization. If in the dominant coalition, or has access to the dominant coalition, which is basically the decision makers of the organization, they are able to bring the sentiments of the public into the strategy. So then that way the strategy will align with what society has as expectations, as mores. And what we end up doing with all of that information is helping the dominant coalition make decisions that are going to be accepted and that give us that legitimacy and that license to operate in the organization. As it was said by De Beers, Stein, and Rensburg, the source of rules and standards and expectations do come from society. So what do we do with this information from the environmental scanning? We plug it into something that we call situational theory. And we all know what this is. We're doing a stakeholder mapping. And then from there, we're building scenarios to find out, exactly which decision is going to render the best opportunity. And this in of itself definitely looks an awful lot like utilitarianism, because you're always looking at alternative actions to find the greatest good. However, our public relation practitioners using utilitarianism to actually calculate that greater good at the end of the consequence. Finally, from there, it has been stated by J. Grunig and L. Grunig back in 1996 that Pearson's framework, it's a double framework that actually pairs teleology and deontology together. And this should be adopted by public relations theory right across the board. So on a teleological note, it means that you need to become aware and familiar with the consequences of the organization's behavior. And then deontology puts the duty to the practitioner to ensure that they communicate via two-way symmetrical communication to ensure that the publics are aware of how they're going to be impacted. Okay, so we move on now to crisis management literature. And what we see here are a couple of different things. Now, again, I'm not trying to be a teacher's pet by bringing on Dr. Flynn's definition, but it is the most parsimonious that I actually found in all of my research. And basically, an organizational crisis is an event that is sudden and it disrupts the regular operations. Soon as you're not operating the way that you need to, your effectiveness goes down, and you certainly are going to start losing money and perhaps even reputation right off the hop. Um, what we can do to actually ensure that an organization crisis doesn't take place is following what the strategic public relations management theory actually suggests, as well as what the crisis managers are suggesting as well, which is making sure that you are constantly scrutinizing the behavior of the organization. And this is to say, you know, what is the ethical climate of this organization? What are the behaviors, and how are people actually being impacted by it? And then from here, we're able to find out much more information on the outside as well, from the environmental scanning and the signal detection aspect of crisis management. But at the end of the day, when we're through in all of this, when we're trying to make decisions, are public relation officers using ethical framework to make decisions? Let's talk a little bit more now about the crisis management environment and some of the pressures that may actually impact, you know, how a crisis manager or public relations practitioner is going to make decisions, or a crisis management team is going to make decisions together. So as we know, there's an awful lot of noise on social media. It's a 24-hour news cycle. And it was just reported last year by the Institute of the Crisis Management that the headlines that have caused organizational crisis has increased by 80% over the last 7 years. And this is no doubt due to the 24-hour cycle. And really, we're always just sitting on this ticking time bomb. And the control of the people that are online, our customers, it's all on them now. They decide where they're going to be, when they want to be there, etc. And they can spread news, bad news, quickly. So this puts a huge urgency on a public relations practitioner to get a response out quickly. Where it used to say that it was a golden hour, now it's being suggested that it is the golden quarter. Okay.
9 minutes, 30 seconds left.
Sorry?
9 minutes, 30 seconds left.
Thank you. So then we also have groupthink as well. Now, groupthink is a group syndrome or a team syndrome where it's very cohesive. Everybody is seeking unanimity. And meanwhile, and nobody wants to actually disrupt what has actually made this group cohesive. And this means that a bad decision can be rendered. A bad symptom of groupthink is that they think that they're invincible, that they don't take input from outsiders, and that they think that their decision is going to be automatically ethical. Social forces is another pressure as well that's in the crisis environment. Skepticism is high, as we'll see later on in the results. And as well, we've got 70% of people actually expect organizations to take a social stance. This is a big thing, and we certainly are seeing that on an everyday basis. And finally, as well, we have what we call the novel situation syndrome. And basically, this is where individuals may be feeling a little bit overwhelmed because they're going through something that they've never experienced before. All of these environments really can hamper the critical thinking of the public relations practitioner. And it's being argued here, not just by me, but also by DeGeorge, who says that ethical decision-making frameworks can help make critical decisions, can help clarify what the problem is and arrive at a solution, and then justify the answer to that solution. So let's go on through the results now so that we can find out exactly what I found out. The research methodology, so I was able to collect data from a voluntary anonymous online survey. It was really difficult to actually get to meet my sample quota. We had it set a quota for 100, and we set that so low because it is very difficult to get people to talk about ethics. This is, it is what it is. We did get 124 responses in total, and you can see that we had a fair range of experience right across. In addition to that, I also split up the entire sample to show that we've got the dominant coalition and also the meso level. And I wanted to separate that to see if there were different levels of knowledge in the results. Okay, so there's an awful lot to look at here. So I just prepared a quick animation summary here. So where you just see that square show up in that left column there, that's the number of people who've actually had the highest level of training at the different levels that are on the far left side. So college, continuing education, employer, have not attended, master's, PhD, and undergrad. You'll see that majority have received ethics training in master's and undergraduate. From there, you will see for deontology that 32% of the masters was familiar, and we also had only 13% from the undergraduate. I'll focus on the very familiar in just a moment. And then you'll also see that, you know, a little bit higher than undergraduate was somewhat surprising, was that the employer, the ones who were actually received ethical training from their employer, actually scored a little bit higher than the undergraduate rate, which I was very surprised at given my experience in ethics training provided by my employer. All right, so overall, we only had about 10% who was very familiar and who was also able to choose the right definition that was in the survey. That's not a very high number at all, but overall in total, we were able to find that 30% of the sample were at least familiar with deontology and answered the question correctly. But this brings us over to that pie chart that's on the top right-hand side, confidently correct. It shows really only that 10% of the entire sample is only confidently correct in their response in terms of how they answered familiar versus very familiar. When you look at utilitarianism, we've got a really big difference that's in store for us. So we've got 54% and 36% respectively for masters and graduates in terms of familiarity. And then we also had people who hadn't even attended an ethics course.
5 minutes.
Yeah, I know. Oh, sorry. Okay. People who haven't even had training are actually very familiar, or familiar at the very least, with utilitarianism, which shows that there is a lopsidedness to the knowledge of these two ethical frameworks. And maybe this actually speaks to what Bentham was saying, that this is the most natural ethical frameworks for people to adopt. Okay, when we're looking at what ethical frameworks were used previous to now, what we see here is that the gut feeling was used 17% of the dominant coalition last year, or in their last crisis, and 27% for the meso. Now there's a I can't see part of my screen here, so just give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. And then 23% of the entire sample had actually used intuition or gut feeling. And this is pretty important because of what I'm about to show you. Utilitarianism, again, scores super high here with 63% of the dominant coalition using utilitarianism. And meanwhile, deontology, just 4% across the board. There doesn't seem to be an awful lot of knowledge. There doesn't seem to be an awful lot of inspiration to use this framework. As we look forward into future organizational crisis, what will the participants be using? And what we see here is that intuition and gut feeling has gone down quite a bit from their last crisis. And the question really needs to be is, why is this the case? There seems to be a huge disconnect. Perhaps there was an experience there that they didn't like about it. Meanwhile, be interested to know how familiar or how confident they are in actually using those frameworks. Utilitarianism overall is the winner of what's going to be used next year. And again, deontology is falling a far second. Moving on to the last couple of slides here, we will see that that ethics is extremely important in crisis management for public relation practitioners. And then when we're looking at the general sentiments of the ethicality of both the private sector, the public sector, and the not-for-profit, you'll see that the private sector is falling way, way behind. They're dealing with a huge reputation crisis. So really, I think I'm going to move on to this next slide here, just so then that way I can get through to my conclusions here. What we really want to say here is that there are some lost opportunities in this. You know, the ethical
2
frameworks
minutes.
could certainly help with the crisis management environment. However, we just don't seem to have an awful lot of confidence to actually use the ethical frameworks, especially in a crisis situation where the stakes are extremely high. So it's encouraging that 1/5 of organizations, you know, have plans that instruct them to use an ethical framework. Research should be done to actually find out if they're using them in the crisis simulation training and or in true events, and if they're actually impeding operations or not. It seems as though that public relation practitioners believe that ethics is really important, but there's not a lot of confidence in me seeing this data that they really feel good about knowing how to use the framework. After all, we're just talking about identifying definitions at this point in time. And then lastly, I think that the ethics training needs to be enhanced significantly to make sure that public relation practitioners can actually serve as the ethical pulse of the organization. I think that it's important that we actually do it, considering we are the interface between the organization and its publics. And finally, as well, you will see that the private sector is the perception there pales in comparison to the not-for-profit sector and also government. And it would be very interesting to learn a little bit more about what public relation practitioners think they can do or ought to do to help that reputation forward. Limitations, well, there are several. I'll just mention a few really quickly. Really tough to get the responses. It took me quite some time just to get to reach the 100 threshold. And I also do recognize as well that when I'm actually reporting on the dominant coalition, there isn't even 100, only 46. Reflexivity, to a certain extent, because some of the individuals who I reached out to, I do have relationships with me, but given the responses that I've received, I think that that is very low. And lastly, and this might be a little bit funny to people, but time. Time was a limitation. Ethical theory is extremely profound. It put a humongous it was a big weight to actually carry to try and figure out exactly what the foundations of these two ethical frameworks are. And it was Shannon Bowen that actually, you know, said one word that actually changed me, probably my life for the long haul, and that was transcendentalist. I had no idea what she was talking about when she said transcendentalist, and that's when I realized that if I'm going to talk to the committee about ethics, that I better know exactly what she's talking about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Seirge. Thank you. Started off, Michael.
Thanks, Terry. Seirge, congratulations on getting to this point. I know that you've been juggling an awful lot of things, and that this has been something that you have been extremely passionate about and dedicated to, almost to the point that, you know, I've had to pull you back a few times because you've gotten so far down into the weeds. But it's obvious that you care a great deal about this, and so congratulations on this. And as I told you all along, this is not an easy area. I'm sure that Alex and Terry David would concur, and Tony and Brad would say the same thing. This is a tough area to tackle. And this is only the second capstone I know of that's tried to approach the ethics topic, and you did it. You took onto it. And in terms of thoroughness, the literature review, for those of you that don't know, he's got about 25 more pages of literature review that I wouldn't let him include in this. He's got to save that for his PhD. I want to start out with just two very quick questions and then really get to Alex and Brad. So on your slide number 10, can you drive back to that for a second? Can you just go backwards?
Sorry, animations.
Two
There we go.
more. Two more. One more. There, right. I thought this was a very interesting slide because what you're saying is that the strategic public relations and management theory and approach is really where it lies for practitioners. And then you had a quote actually in your paper, and I'm just going to read it for everybody. Strategic public relations management is the ultimate day-to-day machinery of the public relations department, and crisis management theory is its fuel. What do you mean by that?
Thank you very much for the question. So I because I feel as though I feel very strongly and passionate about this strategic public relations management theory. I think that this is exactly the way that a public relations department should be managed throughout all organizations, public and private, and not-for-profit sector as well. This is the daily machinery. We've got the environmental scanning that includes internal and external scanning to gather information to find out how the organization is behaving. And what I love about this framework is that it actually scrutinizes the behavior of the organization. It questions it. And then it looks at to how people are actually being impacted. Not always can you actually pick and choose your publics, but the moment that a public does actually raise its hand, the public relations officer should be there immediately gathering that information and running it up the pole to the dominant coalition. And so that's the daily operations of it. They also create the situational theory to figure out what the consequences of all the decisions that the dominant coalition are making in response to perhaps, you know, some of the feedback that we're getting from behavior. And in which case, you know, that's the daily machinery that's encompassing the public relations department. Why I say that the crisis management theory is the fuel to that is because every day the public relations officers should be looking through the lens of the crisis. They're looking to detect issues before they blow up into full-blown crisis. So there's always this motivation to avoid or to prevent a crisis from happening. And so that's what makes all of these daily operations of the strategic public relations management so crucial. And if you actually add that crisis element to it underneath, I think that the organization will be much, much stronger for it.
Okay, thanks. I've got so many other questions, but I'm just going to ask one, and I'm going to leave a real obvious one out there and not get to it in the hopes that probably our chair is going to ask it at the end. But ethics training, if more of that needs to happen for public relations practitioners, who's equipped to do that? Are they?
Who's they?
The practitioners, are they equipped to provide that training to their organizations?
No.
And to themselves, or no?
Based on what I'm seeing here, I mean, for only, especially for deontology, and deontology is on the front end, just making sure that you're not doing anything wrong right off the hop. And you know, like, even if this framework that the Grunigs were talking about was actually brought forward back in 1996, I don't think that it's out there nearly enough for public relation officers and practitioners to actually be guided by that. So, you know, I don't think that public relations professionals right now are in a position to actually provide that training to their organizations. I think that there may be an opportunity to provide more ethics training to public relations professionals, and then from there can deliver training for the whole organization. And that certainly should be embedded into the crisis management plan as well. It shouldn't just stick to the public relations department. It does need to go all the way through the organization. And these ethical frameworks, when you start using them enough, then, you know, they become as familiar to you as, you know, riding your bike or, you know, picking up your favorite tool. but it needs to be something that you are practicing. Is, like I said earlier, it is a discipline on how to actually think and approach dilemmas. And it becomes easier the more and more that you do it. And what I do have to say as well, just to condition that, is, what you saw on those two slides is it's not even 10% of what is actually built into those frameworks. There's abstractions that are necessary. There's a lot of self-reflection that is necessary to understand, some of the roots to the motivations that are making you think a certain way. That all needs to be developed into the theory a little bit more, and also into the day operations of the public relations practitioner, if in fact they're going to live up to the title of being an ethical conscious of an organization.
Right. Okay. Well, so many more questions.
Thank you,
Jerry,
Michael.
go ahead and
Yep.
yield to Alex.
Alex, please.
Sure, thank you. First off, Seirge, congrats on this work. It's really thoughtful, and it's well developed, and it was a pleasure to read, actually. So that's a trifecta of good things. My main question is, where does ethics intersect with strategy? Right? Because you talk about strategic public relations management, and I get a lot of these theories are about evaluating retrospective, right? So where do you think ethics fits with strategy and strategy making?
Well, so I just want to clarify something really quickly, Alex. Did you say that these ethical frameworks are meant to be used retrospectively?
Well, they look retrospective often, yes. They are often used retrospectively. Yeah.
They are often used retrospectively to actually, judge the goodness, the morality of an action, most definitely. But it certainly can be used proactively as well. And so I wasn't able to actually plug this into one of the slides because I only had 25 minutes, but I did put a quick little paragraph in morality in my literature review that describes the different levels of morality development. So you've got pre-conventional, that's basically where infants and toddlers are they're getting the carrot and the stick to actually learn how to, comport properly, how to behave properly. Then you've got the second level, and a lot of people operate at this conventional level, and that's basically where society is telling them what to do, right? Society is telling them what to do, what's socially accepted, what laws are going to stop us from doing certain things. And then you've got that post-conventional, or that economist, or that principle level, and that's where these ethical frameworks actually come into play. So the reason why I actually just gave you a quick illustration of that is because if a practitioner is going to operate at the very least at a second level of moral development, then the practitioner is going to be figuring out what is the community in which it operates is going to allow the operation to do, right? Because at the end of the day, they are the sources of what is allowed. There is that license to operate, and that's given by that's given by the community and by society. So public relations can take all of that information and feed that up into strategy to say whether what people are proposing to do as an organization is actually going to fly with the populace. And then finally, if you wanted to actually go above that and be a principled level, then you certainly would be able to proactively look at this, use the categorical imperative to say, first and foremost, does it take the form of the law of universality, the law of respect, the law of the kingdom of community? And if it doesn't, okay, well, then right off the hop, that doesn't work as a strategy. If that's what you're going to land on, or if you're not happy with that answer, you can go to utilitarianism, and you can actually try and map out a couple of different scenarios to say which one is still going to create the greatest good. we got to do something, right? Which is the one that's going to diminish harm or create the greatest good amongst it all.
So just a quick follow-up, Terry, if I may.
Yep.
So you come from the world of financial world, right?
Yep.
Where we've seen a big emphasis on ESG of late. So environment, social, and governance for people who aren't familiar with the term. It's becoming an investor relations term, broadly called ethical investing, right?
Broadly.
So maybe could you maybe, and this might be putting you on the spot, but and feel free to just say you can't answer if you don't, or that you don't want to. But do you see ethics and strategy coming together more in that sort of financial communications or investor relations world?
Certainly I do. Absolutely. And I mean, that's a really good example of what that is. I think that the popularity of corporate social responsibility, the rise in popularity of that term, corporate citizenship, which is where I used to work at the bank, right? I mean, that is so popular across all the major banks, and frankly, right across the financial sector. It's so popular because of reputation, right? So I mean, organizations. I mean, it's a little bit cynical of me to actually say this, but I'm a cynical person, so I'm okay with it. But I mean, you know, Bentham says this, and it certainly showed up in the Element 2020 Trust Barometer as well, that organizations are doing the right thing. They seem to be trying to do better in their operations, to have less of an impact on the environment, and also to provide the greater good to society. But a lot of people believe that that's actually all being done for the love of reputation, right? And nothing more. And again, this is where organizations at best are operating at a second level of moral development. And it's because they're being browbeaten into doing certain things, because transparency, the demand for transparency is an all-time high. And so the social pressures are actually like doing good to society by, you know, asking organizations and the public sector to do a little bit better.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Seirge. Brad Horn.
Thank you, Terry and Seirge. Nice to be introduced into this process late into the game, but to follow the comments of the other reviewers, really strong topical exploration, fantastic literature review, and connecting this exhaustive, I would call it, tracking of the evolution of how these concepts interrelate. So that combined with your passion for this space is really phenomenal and a great way to start off the week. So kudos on a job well done there. My question is going to focus on research question 3, as well as the idea of term familiarity. And I'm curious, after this process, of your reflection of the confidence of practitioners in understanding the frameworks of deontological and teleological steps. So I know that I've looked at the survey instrument, I've looked at how you're asking the question of term familiarity. I think what I'm asking you in follow-up is, to what level of confidence can you speak of practitioners' understanding of the use of frameworks in their day-to-day management and evaluation?
Yeah, so thanks very much for the question. And I think that I feel like there's a little bit of confidence that's, you know, a little bit low in you as well, because at the end of the day, I mean, like, you read the report, you saw that all I'm asking for is for them to point out what the right definition is, right? So, I mean, I was trying to build, and this is, I mean, I plan on doing more research in this area. So this is like the very first step, just to get an understanding of what's going on here. But you know, this was a baby step in to actually just find out familiarity in terms of what the definition is. And for those of you who weren't actually able to read the thesis, this question in particular, I placed, you know, 4 or 5 different definitions as a multiple choice question, and the individuals needed to choose the definition that they felt fit the term deontology or fit the term utilitarianism. And that was after them saying whether they were familiar or very familiar with the term. So, I mean, I have only based off of the research that this has actually done here. All I can really actually speak to is that the individuals who said that they were very familiar seemed to be confidently correct in the definition that they chose. But in terms of if they know how to actually use this going forward, I don't have enough information there. That would be the next step, and that's actually in my conclusions as well, to find out if it actually helps or if it impedes crisis management. Because I'm not saying that I actually have the panacea to all crisis management woes here. I'm just trying to explore the efficacy and the effectiveness of these frameworks. So, I mean, I guess to summarize my answer there is that just because they chose a definition does not lead me to believe or to guarantee that they know how to use the instrument.
Okay, great.
Follow up, Brett?
Yes, and if I may, in regards to nonprofit, public sector, and private, what are the takeaways that you can identify or correlate based off of this sector analysis?
Well, I think that, overall, I mean, the nonprofit sector always has a little bit more of a glowing reputation, and it's because, at the very heart of it, their strategy is to do good by society, right? If it's a not-for-profit who's, looking after Lake Simcoe, that's right outside our door here, or if it's to look after the people of Greater Toronto, as the United Way does. The core of their strategy is to do good. So I think right off of the hop, the public perception is going to be that. And we also have some pretty stringent guidelines to ensure that, their operation costs are much lower than what they're actually giving out. I believe the CRA flags them at 35% of the operational, of the overall funding costs. With the public sector, that perception there, well, I mean, as Ian Mitroff had also stated earlier, in his book Technology Run Amok, he points out that this new startup era in the digital era, it's out of control, it's rampant, it's ethically baseless, and it's all because the whole motivation behind the private sector is only to increase the bottom line. And Crandall, Spillane, and Parnell all came out saying as well that the problem with this sector, especially the startup sector, is that they're just in the race to the top, and in which case they're not thinking through a lot of the decisions that they're making, or what they're even laying their strategy upon. What are the consequences going to be for society going forward?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Brad. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Michael, for that. Before we break, I have a quick question, Seirge, to ask you, and if I can ask you just to make sure you shorten the time to response. One of the most important parts of the Capstone process is, in fact, knowledge mobilization. Obviously, having an awareness of ethical frameworks and its relationships to treaty matters is important. How do you plan on sharing this information with the practice?
So I'm certainly interested in pursuing some opportunities at conferences. Obviously, we're still going to be resigned to virtual conferences, but I do like actually doing some public speaking. And I certainly would want to go to associations as well, both in Canada and the States, to actually mobilize this and to show what the state of the ethical knowledge is right now of this industry, and perhaps how it could actually help public relation practitioners going forward. In addition to that, if there are any other opportunities where I could actually share the results with more people in our field, then I'd be more than happy to take anybody up on those opportunities.
Well, obviously, the opportunity to dissect your capstone into bite-sized pieces that you can share in publication form would be very helpful. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to actually use technology for the first time. Traditionally, the committee would separate and then do a phone call, but we're going to actually use breakout rooms. And that's where I hope this works here. So I'm going to send everybody but Alex, Brad, Michael, and myself into a breakout room. You'll stay there until we are done. And then, gentlemen, don't you go anywhere yet, okay? So I will send a message to your breakout room when we are ready to have you come back, okay? So good luck. Hope to see you back. Hello, all. Hello, all. Everybody. How was the other room? Was it good? Did you like the decorating in the other room? I spent all weekend just putting up the Christmas decorations in that other room, and you know, it doesn't get used that often. But
Were the
anyway.
hors d'oeuvres good? Were the hors d'oeuvres good?
The drinks. I'm going to turn it over to Professor Michael Meath.
Well, Seirge, congratulations. I do want to have a bit of a conversation with you afterwards on some thoughts and comments from the group, but we were very impressed by the level of work and the attention that you put to this, and so we're pleased to tell you that you passed this, and you passed it with honors. So congratulations.
Congratulations.
Somebody needs to take a picture before we forget here. I'll take a picture as well.
That's a good idea.
And I can.
Scott Anderson looks so pleased there. He's just got that pleased face on.
I'm just surprised.
Oh, geez.
Actually, Mom looks the happiest.
Yeah, you're right.
Hey, Scott, I've got some letter of reference for APR that I have to write, and I think I just have to take that back now.
Okay.
Hold on. Let me just close this. I'm going to close this. Okay, so Seirge, congratulations. Congratulations and welcome to the Alumni Club. And you have your peers here who have gone before you, so they can introduce you to the handshake. And I want to thank you for all the hard work that you've engaged in over the last number of years. I know that this has been challenging. It's challenging for everybody, right? But to be able to land this plane, using a Michael metaphor, is a really important part of the program. And you've done that today. And we're very, very proud of you to have done this. And we wish you all the luck that you have as you go forward in distributing this information to the practice and to the scholarship as well. Congratulations.
Excellent.
Hey.
Thank you all. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Brad. And thank you, Alex, for all your work. And thank you, MCMers and family, for continuing to show up and to cheer one on. All the best, everybody.
So many of you today. That was
And
really nice.
Seirge, we will have this. We will do some post-production, and it'll be up on our website. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you very
And
much.
you can-
Seirge.
Congratulations.
You can actually,
Bye.
Take care,
Congratulations.
everyone.
Bye, Michael. Nice to see you.
Nice to
Thanks.
you can
see
actually put MCM
Bye.
behind your name now. He's gone. Did he already leave?
Going right now. Going right now.
Okay.
Oh,
Congratulations.
Bye.
Hey, how are you?
Congratulations.
Good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
I really appreciate it.
Bye, Seirge.
Bye-bye.